It was supposed to be another Thursday night at the Ed Sullivan Theater, October 23rd, 2014. The Late Show with David Letterman was in full swing, the audience laughing at David's opening monologue about the latest political scandal. The band was tight, the energy was electric, and everything was going exactly according to script. Until David noticed the little girl in the front row. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, sitting perfectly still in a powder blue dress with white Peter Pan collar. Her black hair pulled into 2 neat pigtails tied with yellow ribbons. While everyone around her roared with laughter, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching David with an intensity that seemed far too serious for a child her age. Beside her sat an older man, late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime of hard work. He wore a navy blue blazer that looked like it had been purchased specifically for this occasion, pressed slacks, and a tie that was slightly crooked. His hand rested protectively on the little girl's shoulder. David had been doing this long enough to recognize when something interesting was sitting in his audience. He abandoned his prepared material mid-sentence. "Hold on, folks. I need to address something here." David walked to the edge of the stage, pointing gently toward the little girl. "Young lady in the blue dress, front row. What's your name, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up at the older man, who nodded encouragingly. She stood up carefully, smoothing her dress, and spoke in a clear, confident voice that belied her small, retry, you art fact, Shakelanday, Yaz. It was supposed to be another Thursday night at the Ed Sullivan Theater. October 23rd, 2014. The Late Show with David Letterman was in full swing, the audience laughing at David's opening monologue about the latest political scandal. The band was tight, the energy was electric, and everything was going exactly according to script. Until David noticed the little girl in the front row. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, sitting perfectly still in a powder blue dress with white Peter Pan collar, her black hair pulled into 2 neat pigtails tied with yellow ribbons. While everyone around her roared with laughter, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching David with an intensity that seemed far too serious for a child her age. Beside her sat an older man, late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime of hard work. He wore a navy blue blazer that looked like it had been purchased specifically for this occasion, pressed slacks, and a tie that was slightly crooked. His hand rested protectively on the little girl's shoulder. David had been doing this long enough to recognize when something interesting was sitting in his audience. He abandoned his prepared material mid-sentence. "Hold on, folks. Need to address something here." David walked to the edge of the stage, pointing gently toward the little girl. "Young lady in the blue dress, front row. What's your name, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up at the older man, who nodded encouragingly. She stood up carefully, smoothing her dress, and spoke in a clear, confident voice that belied her small stature. "My name is Lucy Chen. I'm 7 3/4 years old." The audience chuckled at the precision of her age. David smiled warmly. 7 3/4, that's very specific. "Lucy, who's this handsome gentleman with you?" "That's my grandpa. His name is Thomas Chen, but I call him Grandpa Tommy." She looked up at him with pure adoration. "He's my best friend in the whole world." Thomas's eyes immediately filled with tears, though he tried to blink them away. David noticed. "Well, Grandpa Tommy, you've got quite a fan here. Lucy, can I ask you something? This is a pretty grown-up show for someone who's 7 3/4. What made you want to come tonight?" Lucy tilted her head thoughtfully, as if considering the question with great care. "Grandpa Tommy watches your show every single night. He records it if he has to work late at the fire station. Well, he used to work there. Now he's retired so he can take care of me." "He retired to take care of you?" David's interest was clearly piqued. "That's a pretty big deal. Your grandpa must love you very much." "He does," Lucy said matter-of-factly. "And I love him very much too. That's why I saved my allowance for 6 months to buy us tickets. I wanted to surprise him." The audience made a collective awe sound. David pressed his hand to his chest in an exaggerated gesture of being touched, but his eyes showed he was genuinely moved. 6 months of allowance? Lucy, that might be the sweetest thing I've heard all year. Grandpa Tommy, did you know about this?" Thomas shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "Not until she presented the tickets last week. I couldn't believe it. Still can't." David walked down the steps from the stage, moving closer to them. This wasn't standard procedure, but his producers knew better than to interrupt when David was following his instincts. "Lucy, I have a question for you, and I want you to think about it carefully." David crouched down so he was closer to her eye level. "When you grow up, what do you want to be?" It was a standard question, the kind talk show hosts asked children all the time. The audience expected to hear teacher, or veterinarian, or maybe astronaut. They were smiling in anticipation of whatever cute answer this precocious little girl would give. Lucy looked at her grandfather, then back at David. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, and what she said would stop the show completely. "I want to be old like my grandpa, because he says old people remember the most love." The smile froze on David's face. The audience went silent. Even Paul Schaffer, who'd been casually adjusting his keyboard, stopped moving. David stood up slowly, his hand going to his mouth. When he lowered it, his eyes were visibly wet. What did you just say, Lucy?" Lucy repeated herself, still in that clear, innocent voice. "I want to be old, like Grandpa Tommy, because he says old people remember the most love. The more years you live, the more love you get to keep in your heart. So I want to be very, very old, so I can remember lots and lots of love." Thomas Chen broke down completely. He pulled Lucy close to him, his shoulders shaking with sobs he could no longer contain. Lucy wrapped her small arms around his neck, patting his back gently. "It's okay, Grandpa," she whispered, but her microphone picked it up. "You can cry. You always tell me it's okay to cry when we miss Daddy." That single sentence revealed everything. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front rows were already crying. David Letterman, a man who'd built a career on maintaining composure and delivering perfect comedic timing, stood frozen with tears streaming down his face. He walked over to Lucy and Thomas and did something unprecedented in late show history. He sat down on the floor in front of them, right there in his expensive suit, and looked up at the little girl. "Lucy, can you tell me about your daddy?" What the audience didn't know, what nobody except Thomas and Lucy knew, was that 2 years ago, Thomas's only son, Michael Chen, had died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 34. Michael had been a middle school math teacher, a devoted husband, and a father who'd lived for his daughter. When he got his diagnosis, the doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 8, fighting every single day to have more time with Lucy. Michael's wife, Lisa, had fallen apart after his death. The grief was too much, too heavy, too all-consuming. 6 months after Michael died, Lisa moved across the country to stay with her parents, trying to outrun the memories. She called Lucy once a week, sent presents on holidays, but she couldn't be the mother Lucy needed. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So Thomas Chen, at 64 years old, had retired from the fire department where he'd worked for 42 years. He sold his small house and moved into Michael and Lisa's home. He became everything Lucy needed: parent, guardian, playmate, comforter, and keeper of memories. Every night, without fail, Lucy would climb into Thomas's lap and say the same thing. "Tell me a story about when Daddy was little." And every night, Thomas would reach into his vast reservoir of memories and pull out a gem. Michael learning to ride a bike, Michael's first day of school, Michael teaching himself to solve a Rubik's Cube, Michael staying up all night studying for his teaching certification, Michael holding Lucy for the first time, crying with joy. Old people remember the most love hadn't been a random philosophical statement. It was something Thomas had told Lucy one night, when she'd asked him why his face had so many wrinkles. "Every wrinkle is a memory, Lucy Bug," he'd said, "and most of my memories are full of love. Your daddy, your grandma, before she passed. You. The older I get, the more love I have stored up in here." He'd tapped his chest. "So, in a way, old people are the richest people in the world, because we've got all this love we've collected over the years." Lucy had taken this explanation and transformed it into her life's ambition, to grow old so she could collect as much love as possible, just like her grandfather. Now, sitting in the late show studio with David Letterman on the floor in front of her, Lucy began to talk about her father. "My daddy was the best math teacher in the whole world," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He made math fun. He used to say that numbers were like magic. You just had to learn the spell." David listened, not interrupting, barely breathing. "Daddy got really sick when I was 5. He had to go to the hospital a lot, but even when he was sick, He still read me stories every night. Sometimes he was too tired to read out loud, so I would read to him instead. He said I was the best reader he ever heard. Thomas held Lucy tighter, his face buried in her hair. Before Daddy went to heaven, he told me something really important. He said, "Lucy, I'm going to miss so many things. I'm going to miss your first day of middle school and your graduation and your wedding day, but Grandpa Tommy is going to be there for all of it. And when you look at him, you'll see a little bit of me too. Because Grandpa taught me how to be a daddy, and I'm part of him, and you're part of me. So we're all connected like a chain." The audience was openly sobbing now. Production assistants were crying in the wings. Even the camera operators had tears streaming down their faces. Lucy continued, her voice never wavering, as if she'd told this story so many times it had become a kind of prayer. "After Daddy died, Mommy was too sad to take care of me. She tried really hard, but her sad was too big. So Grandpa Tommy said he would take care of me instead. He quit his job at the fire station and moved into our house. Every morning, he makes me breakfast. Every afternoon, he helps me with my homework, and every single night, he tells me a story about Daddy." She looked up at Thomas with absolute trust and love. "Grandpa says that as long as we remember Daddy and talk about him, he's not really gone. He's just in a different room we can't see yet. And Grandpa has so many memories of Daddy because he's old, and old people remember the most love. So I want to be old too. I want to have a whole life full of memories and love, just like Grandpa. And then when I'm old, I'll tell my grandchildren about Daddy and about Grandpa Tommy, and the love will just keep going and going forever." David Letterman had conducted thousands of interviews in his career. He'd talked to presidents, movie stars, stars, musicians, and regular people with extraordinary stories. But in that moment, sitting on the floor of his stage in front of a 7-year-old girl in a powder blue dress, he found himself completely unable to speak. Finally, he managed to find his voice, though it was thick with emotion. "Lucy, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's what getting old is for. It's for collecting love and memories and stories, and then passing them on." He turned to Thomas. "Sir, you raised an incredible son, and now you're raising an incredible granddaughter. I don't know what to say except thank you for sharing your family with us tonight." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. His face was wet with tears, but for the first time in 2 years, they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of pride, of love, of gratitude, that his granddaughter was exactly who Michael would have wanted her to be. David stood up slowly, brushing off his suit. He walked back to his desk, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he addressed the audience directly. "Folks, I need to tell you something. I've been doing this show for a long time, 22 years, and in all that time, I've been chasing laughs, chasing ratings, chasing the perfect joke. But what Lucy just reminded me is that none of that matters compared to this: being present, being remembered, being part of someone's chain of love." He paused, collecting himself. "Lucy, you said you saved 6 months of allowance to buy these tickets. That's money you could have spent on toys or candy or whatever 7-year-olds like. But you spent it to make your grandpa happy. That tells me everything I need to know about you and everything I need to know about how well he's raising you." David looked directly into the camera. "I want everyone watching at home to think about this. Who in your life is collecting memories of you? Who's going to tell your stories when you're gone? And more importantly, whose stories are you keeping alive? Because Lucy's right. That's what it's all about. The chain of love that connects us across generations." He turned back to Lucy and Thomas. "Lucy, I want to make you a promise. Every year on your birthday, I'm going to send you a letter. And in that letter, I'm going to tell you something I learned that year about love or family or memories. And when you're old, like your grandpa, you'll have a whole collection of letters from an old talk show host who learned something important from a little girl in a blue dress." Lucy's face lit up. "Really? You promise?" "I promise. Cross my heart." David made an X motion over his chest. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual energetic clapping. It was slower, deeper, the kind of applause that comes from a place of profound emotional response. But David wasn't done. "Also, I want to do something else. Lucy, you saved your allowance for 6 months. That shows dedication and love. But I think you're Grandpa deserves a break from expenses for a little while. So The Late Show is going to set up an education fund for you. We're going to make sure that when you're ready for college, the money is there. Because something tells me you're going to grow up to do something amazing." Lucy looked at her grandfather, eyes wide. "Grandpa, did you hear that?" Thomas could only nod, overwhelmed. David continued, "And Grandpa Tommy, I did a little research before the show. I know you spent 42 years with the New York Fire Department. I know you've saved countless lives. I know you retired early to take care of your granddaughter. So here's what we're going to do. The fire department has a charity that supports retired firefighters. We're making a donation in your son Michael's name. Because the chain of love doesn't just go forward to children. It goes out to communities, to the people who serve, to the families who sacrifice." The applause grew louder. People were standing now, not because it was expected, but because they needed to physically express the emotion flooding through them. Lucy tugged on her grandfather's sleeve. "Grandpa, did we do something good?" Thomas finally found his voice. "Lucy Bug, you did something incredible. You told Daddy's story, and now all these people know about him. He's not forgotten. He'll never be forgotten." David walked back over to them one more time. He knelt down so he was eye level with Lucy. "Lucy, can I ask you one more question?" "Yes, Mr. Letterman?" "What's your favorite story about your daddy? The one your grandpa tells you that makes you happiest?" Lucy thought for a moment, her face scrunching up in concentration. Then she smiled. "My favorite story is about when Daddy was 8 years old. He found a baby bird that fell out of its nest. He brought it home and begged Grandpa to let him keep it. Grandpa said okay, but only until it was strong enough to fly. So Daddy fed that bird with an eyedropper every 2 hours. He made it a nest out of a shoebox and cotton balls. He named it Professor Tweets because even then, Daddy loved math and he said the bird looked very smart." The audience chuckled softly through their tears. After 3 weeks, the bird was ready to fly. Daddy didn't want to let it go, but Grandpa explained that sometimes loving something means setting it free. So they took Professor Tweets outside, and Daddy opened his hands, and the bird flew away. Lucy's voice got quieter, more thoughtful. Daddy was crying because he missed the bird already, but Grandpa told him something important. He said, "Michael, that bird will fly away, but it will always remember the boy who saved it. Love doesn't end when something leaves. It just changes shape." Lucy looked up at David with those wise, ancient eyes in her young face. "I think that's what happened with Daddy. He had to fly away, but he remembers us, and we remember him. The love didn't end. It just changed shape." David Letterman, who had interviewed presidents without flinching, who had faced career setbacks with humor, who had undergone heart surgery and come back with jokes, broke down completely. He sat down right there on the stage floor and wept. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of America's most famous television hosts cried openly, his shoulders shaking, his face in his hands. Paul Schaffer stood up from his keyboard and started to play something soft and instrumental. It wasn't planned. It was just what the moment needed. After what felt like both an eternity and an instant, David looked up at Lucy. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." The show went to commercial break, but David didn't move. He stayed there with Lucy and Thomas, talking quietly. The audience remained in their seats, unwilling to break the spell of what they'd witnessed. When the show returned from commercial, David was back at his desk, but his planned segments were abandoned. Instead, he talked about his own father, who'd passed away when David was young. He talked about memories and legacy and the responsibility we all have to keep each other's stories alive. "My father died when I was young," David said, "and for a long time, I was angry about all the things he'd miss. But what Lucy helped me understand tonight is that he didn't miss them. Because I carried him with me to all of those moments. Every achievement, every failure, every important day, he was there in the lessons he taught me, in the way he loved me, in the chain that connects us." He looked at Lucy one more time. "Thank you, Lucy Chen. You're 7 3/4 years old, and you just taught me something it took me 67 years to fully understand." After the show wrapped, David spent another hour with Lucy and Thomas backstage. He wanted to know everything about Michael, what he taught, how he made math fun, what kind of father he'd been. Thomas shared stories, and David listened with the kind of attention he usually reserved for the most important interviews of his career. Before they left, David gave Lucy his personal email address, handwritten on a piece of late show stationery. "This is just for you," he told her. "Anytime you want to tell me a story about your dad or about your grandpa or about anything at all, you write to me. I promise I'll write back." Lucy carefully folded the paper and put it in her dress pocket. "Mr. Letterman, when you're old like Grandpa, you're going to have so many memories of tonight." David smiled through fresh tears. "I already do, Lucy. I already do." The episode aired 2 weeks later. The segment with Lucy went viral within hours, shared millions of times across every social media platform. Comments poured in from around the world. "I lost my father last year and stopped talking about him because it hurt too much. Lucy reminded me that the pain means the love was real. I'm calling my grandfather tomorrow. I haven't spoken to him in months, and I don't even know why. That little girl has more wisdom than most adults will ever have." David Letterman crying on the floor is the most human moment I've ever seen on television. But the real impact happened in living rooms and nursing homes and hospitals around the country. Adult children called their aging parents. Grandparents reached out to grandchildren. People began sharing stories of loved ones who'd passed, keeping their memories alive instead of locked away in grief. Lucy Chen became a symbol of something the world desperately needed: the understanding that love transcends death, that memories are our most precious inheritance, and that getting old isn't about losing vitality, it's about collecting love. David kept his promise. Every year on Lucy's birthday, a letter arrived, handwritten on late show stationery. In the first letter, he told her about learning to appreciate small moments. In the second, he wrote about the day his own son was born and the overwhelming love he felt. In the third, he shared a story about his mother. Lucy kept every letter in a special box her grandfather made for her, right next to the box where she kept her father's teaching awards and favorite books. Thomas Chen lived to see Lucy graduate high school with honors. He lived to see her get accepted to college on a full scholarship, though she never needed to use the education fund David had set up because her grades earned her even better opportunities. He lived to see her choose to major in education, wanting to be a math teacher like her father. On Thomas's 74th birthday, Lucy gave him a present that made him weep with joy. A book she'd written and bound herself, titled "The Chain of Love: Stories My Grandfather Told Me About My Father." Every story Thomas had ever shared was in that book, carefully recorded and illustrated with photos and drawings. But the dedication page was what broke him. "For Grandpa Tommy, who taught me that old people remember the most love, and who loved me enough to collect a lifetime of memories to share. You are my chain to Daddy, and I will be someone else's chain to you. Love doesn't end, it just changes shape." When David Letterman retired from The Late Show in 2015, Lucy Chen was in the audience for his final show. She was 10 years old by then, still wearing pigtails, still sitting next to her grandfather. In his final monologue, David mentioned her. "3 years ago, a little girl in a blue dress taught me something I should have known all along. She reminded me that the point of life isn't the jokes we tell or the ratings we get. It's the love we collect and the memories we keep and the stories we pass on. Lucy, if you're watching, thank you. You changed me. You changed a lot of people." The camera found Lucy in the audience and she waved shyly. Beside her, Thomas beamed with pride. Today, Lucy Chen is studying to be a teacher. She volunteers at a program that pairs children who've lost parents with elderly mentors, creating new chains of love and memory. She still receives letters from David Letterman, though now he's retired and the stationery is different. And every night, without fail, she calls her grandfather and says, "Tell me a story." Sometimes it's about her father. Sometimes it's about Thomas's own childhood. Sometimes it's about the day Lucy was born, or her first day of school, or the night they went to see David Letterman. Because Lucy Chen understands something most people spend their whole lives learning. We are the sum of the stories told about us, and the greatest gift we can give or receive is the promise that our story will continue, passed down through the chain of love that connects generation to generation. David Letterman broke down in tears on live television because a 7-year-old girl reminded him that the question isn't how long we live, but how much love we collect along the way, and that getting old isn't something to fear, it's something to aspire to, because old people remember the most love.